Okay, everybody, this is, of course, the great and glorious, soon to be famous one day, Nick Dutch, wishing you, of course, a happy, happy Halloween. But the purpose of this first video on my little Halloween series is just to talk about Halloween, just from, my point of view. What is it really? What is Halloween to Nick Dutch? Why am I interested in this as a time of year? I regard it as being very mysterious, very enigmatic. I think that there's an awful lot which is not properly known or discussed or thought about when we come to the Halloween season. And I think it's like an expression of what autumn is about and fear, basically. Now, I don't know whether you remember way back in the day, 35, 40 years ago, maybe even further back in history than that, when we used to go to the firework displays on November the 5th, here in the UK when I was a kid. It was always freezing cold, and there was always ice on the puddles, there was always frost in the air, there was mist, and it felt much more autumnal than it does these days. So global warming, climate change, or whatever it is, has now shifted the seasons. So November is a bit chilly, but it's not out and out freezing. Taking that into account, what would the weather have been like at the end of October, I don't know, 5 centuries ago, 10 centuries ago? What would it have been like? And what would people have been thinking about and afraid of in the ancient time? If you were to understand that it would already be cold in October, and you're looking forward, so to speak, ho ho, to midwinter, and of course the months after it, when it's going to be colder here in Northern Europe, you're probably worried about your well-being, your health, and possibly even dying horribly. In those days, if you were lucky enough to live in a house, your first task in the morning would be to get a fire going. When I was a kid, we used to have single glazed glass in the windows. We didn't have this double glazing with PVC units. We didn't have any of that. And often in late autumn, we would have ice, sometimes thick fronds of it, on the inside of the glass. And that's in essentially heated house, okay? So what would life have been like if the first thing you've got to do in your house is to make a fire? Your fingers stiff, cold, brittle, because it's so cold. You can't handle your tinder box or your matches or your whatever it is you're using to light the fire. The very action of picking up the sharp pieces of wood with your frozen hands to carry them to the fireplace would have been a trial. Working out whether you've got enough firewood to keep the place warm during that week or that month or that season would have been a trial. There would have been layers and layers and layers of anxiety and frustration and complexity, making your life much harder. And on top of that, the possibility of your relatives, your family, your friends dying in the cold of the winter would have been on your mind rather a lot. So this is why I believe that in Northern Europe the Halloween time of year is really important, because it would have been a time when people are facing the possibility of death. They would have to come to terms with it, and they would have to find some way of dealing with it. And of course, when there's lots of people with lots of anxiety and paranoia, then all kinds of folk legends and issues would start to come to the surface, and people's fears and psychological issues and strange beliefs would also come to the surface. So you can easily understand that in a time of year of heightened fear, there will be much more mythologies, much more stories, much more things to be afraid of, and of course a little bit of ghost stories. Why? Because you're approaching a certain time of year which is having a very serious frightening effect upon your mind. So what was the end of October, beginning of November, way back in the day? What was it? It is the place in the year when you are most afraid. Now, with a lot of us these days, not all of us, we don't have those fears. We can have central heating, turn on an electric radiator. We can do things to deal with the problems. But also in this era right now, when in the UK we got this thing called the cost of living crisis, when in the world, the energy bills have gone up. It started out when I moved in here a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, to be about £60 a month, and now it's up to £150 a month, roughly speaking, and it's going to go up higher to a couple of hundred just for the electric and the gas. I think a lot of people are going to be cutting back on that, and so I think the Halloween season this year could in fact be more frightening to more people. And of course these days there's a need for food banks. There's food banks out there, and I really feel that we need to bring back a spirit of having a laugh with and taking the mickey out of and genuinely challenging the energy of this particular season, because I think it's important for people's emotional well-being to have some way of balancing the emotions, which you can do either with light-hearted, positive and optimistic stuff, or which you could do with something a bit more horrific, because both of these two has its therapeutic power on people. And so therefore I tend to bring to you a spiritual but also maybe a little bit childish imagery for the Halloween festival. And I think that these balloons are brilliant because what they do is they show how you can take something really rather gross and you can turn it into something fun or friendly, even if it is slightly creepy, in order to help people to emotionally deal with and process the frightening things of life. So, I would like to say, let us welcome the Halloween season in. Let us welcome it in. Not with fear, but with a desire to laugh at the fear. A desire to try and perceive fear of the future and fear of the cold and of the winter in a different way and in a different light.